Good evening. My name is Mariam Elahi, and I'm the president and CEO of the Community Foundation of Eastern Connecticut. And it's my distinct pleasure to welcome you to be moderating tonight's event and to welcome you to this event in the ongoing series that started in December of 2025 by the Connecticut Bar Foundation, the Connecticut Bar Association, in collaboration with the Connecticut Judicial Branch. This Access to Justice speaker series serves as an ongoing forum for the presentation and exploration of existing and emerging issues in addressing Connecticut's access to the justice gap. The unmet civil legal needs of Connecticut's residents, particularly those of low and limited income, are significant and sometimes overwhelming. These unmet needs create instability in the most personal and impactful aspects of people's lives, including safe and secure housing, family relations, custody of children, relief from abuse, immigration status, eligibility for government benefits, and of course, employment. Addressing this gap requires a comprehensive approach. Narrowing the access to justice gap encompasses attorney access, legal aid and pro bono responses, ensuring awareness of the problem, providing information and resources regarding potential solutions, promoting procedural transparency and fairness, and so forth. Tonight, as we discuss the impact of federal cuts on Connecticut's legal system, we hope to delve into discussing some of these issues and a holistic approach to addressing them. Just let me give a quick intro to the phenomenal speakers who are here with us tonight, and they will each take a few more minutes to share with you what they do. We have with us tonight Karen Lash, who's a fellow at Georgetown Law's Tech Institute and Justice Lab. Karen was the founding executive director of the U.S. Legal Aid Interagency Roundtable and an expert consultant to the United States Department of Justice, the Office for Access to Justice under President Biden. With us also tonight is Isha Canada, who is the Deputy Commissioner and Chief Strategy Officer for the Connecticut Department of Social Services. She's responsible for aligning and measuring the strategic initiatives of the agency. Deputy Commissioner Canada also serves on the board of the Connecticut Paid Family Leave Authority. We also have Greg Kirshner, who is the Executive Director and Legal Director of Connecticut Fair Housing Center. Greg is a graduate of Georgetown Law and George Washington University and has over 20 years of experiences advocating for victims of housing discrimination. Agata Rashchik-Lavska is the manager attorney for the Children at Risk Unit of Connecticut Legal Services. She has extensive experience in litigation, advocacy, and policy work. She serves on the steering committee of the Connecticut Justice Alliance and on the Social Emotional Learning Collaborative. Last but not least is Daniela Bello, who is the lead family violence victim advocate at the Prudence Crandall Center. She founded a new legal clinic through a partnership with UConn School of Law, providing survivors of domestic violence with free expert legal representation. So we have quite a panel of experts here with us tonight. We will hear from each of them during the course of the webinar, and there will be an opportunity for questions. So please be prepared to put some questions in the chat. We will explore the current landscape. We will explore changes and how things have impacted Connecticut and the lives of people who we all want to serve and do serve. So with that, I'd like to just dive in and begin our program. And our first speaker is going to be Karen. Good evening, Karen. Thank you for being here with us tonight. You have extensive experience with federal funding and federal grants. Tell us a little bit about the federal funding landscape in general and the changes that you have observed, particularly in the last year, and where are you seeing the most significant cuts nationally?
Thanks, Miriam. So what makes this all so brutal is that over the last 14 plus years, as the federal government really recognized that to accomplish its policy priorities that you listed actually in your opening regarding housing and healthcare and employment, education, family stability, et cetera, that it needs to integrate legal aid into its programs. So then when we add up all of those separate non-LSC federal funding streams, turns out combined, they're the largest funding source for civil legal aid. And that makes what I'm about to review all the more painful. So this is a trigger warning. I'm delivering bad news, and I think it's unethical to sugarcoat it. But we also will have a now what conversation to get out of the dark place, because we have to figure out how to serve more people with fewer resources. So my heartfelt thanks to the Planning Committee for the speaker series and the panelists, because we're only going to be able to figure this out together. So the context, the backdrop for the federal funding crisis is its own toxic swirl. And that includes hundreds of thousands of career civil servants and their expertise gone. Immigration judges are fired. The safety net is shredding, including Medicaid and SNAP. Federal enforcement of civil rights is vanishing. And agencies like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau that resolve millions of consumer complaints, they and others have been hobbled or shuttered. And all of that and more impacts the people we serve. So when we zoom in on the funding part of the toxic swirl, we should first pause to cheer the amazing news about the LSC appropriations. That could have gone way differently. But many of those non-LSC streams face elimination or cuts, and the addition of terms and conditions about DEI, immigration, and other issues. So those terms and conditions are preventing some organizations, including some in Connecticut, from accepting the funds that still exist and creating new risks for those who take them, especially the risk of False Claims Act allegations, which can be pursued by the federal government and private parties. And again, the impact of all of that is felt in our communities, in our courts, state and local governments. It's worth remembering that on average, about a third of every state budget is federal funds. And it impacts all of us, and especially our clients. So 2026, I'm sorry to say, is looking worse. We're starting to see even more aggressive strategies to use federal funds to coerce and punish grantees. So my first example, I'm going to spend a little extra time on the assault on DEI. Last year, every grant-making agency took that executive order on DEI and they applied it a little differently, used some different language, so we were parsing it all out. Lots of ambiguities. And then came the July 2025 Justice Department's DEI guidance memo, supposedly offering clarification. And that DEI memo lists so-called best practices and unlawful activities and best practices. And while they say the memo's best practices are guidance, not law, they really matter because of the Justice Department's new civil rights fraud initiative that is using that memo for enforcement purposes. So again, it raises the stakes for certifying that you're not engaging in illegal DEI. But here's the latest of the bad news on implementing those executive orders. On Tuesday of this week, the U.S. Government Services Administration, GSA, they are the administering agency for SAM.gov, the system for award management that every grant applicant knows and uses to apply at the outset. And GSA just published their proposed new certification implementing the DEI executive order. Now, this would be the first uniform government-wide certification implementing that DEI executive order. It's 14173. And the uniform language actually also includes some immigration and anti-terrorism certifications as well. And that language tracks the July 2025 DOJ guidance, which is just filled with language that is still being challenged in multiple courts. So I'll quickly note three other new tactics before mentioning some good news. Next up is the grant terminations in 2025. They used termination for convenience and no longer effectuating U.S. goals or agency priorities language to unilaterally cancel grants. That was language from an existing CFR provision, but I had never heard of it being used at all, much less in this way. And that language is starting to show up in some grant agreements. Next, they are openly politicizing some funding cuts and awards, like just saying no to blue states. Some examples include canceling clean energy grants and childcare funding. But most ominous, from my perspective, is that on January 20th, OMB, the Office for Management and Budget, they sent a memo to all grant-making agencies launching an effort to identify nearly all federal spending to governments, to universities and nonprofits, naming 14 states and DC. They all voted against President Trump, and this includes Connecticut. Now, OMB has said in the memo that they are searching for fraud, but the memo says little about why they're collecting this data. But it scares me, and I can imagine what they might do with it. The final new tactic, and as a former Fed, this really kind of freaks me out, is a recent USDA memorandum, and probably there aren't many USDA grantees on the call, but they are threatening federal employees, saying they must take reasonable and appropriate actions to address noncompliance with any award term by a grantee, and employees who fail to act or report may be disciplined. So I fear that this threat will to federal employees will spread to other agencies. But before handing over the baton, a little good news, and that is that litigation has been our superpower. At least 26 federal district court judges have issued opinions enjoining enforcement of agency terms and conditions or reinstating terminated grants. We don't always win, but mostly so far. And I really believe the plaintiffs and their lawyers are heroes, and that includes your state attorney general, Tong, because since SCOTUS said there will be no more nationwide injunctions, your attorney general has to be a party to those challenges. So the injunctions won will apply in Connecticut. So my hope is that many more organizations will assess their capacity to challenge. They'll get prepared as possible, including having counsel, and if targeted, they can challenge it. So that's it. My bad news and a little good news.
Well, thank you, Karen, for sharing with us a sense of the big picture at the national level. This must be a historic moment in the United States of litigation by states against the federal government. So now we'd like to zoom into Connecticut and get a sense of how the federal funding is impacting us on the ground in Connecticut. Agatha, can you please help us with getting a better sense of this landscape?
Good evening. Thank you for being here, and thank you to the CBA, CBF, and everyone who helped plan this event. My name is Agata Ross-Chiklovska. I'm the managing attorney of the Children at Risk Unit at Connecticut Legal Services, and we are the state's largest nonprofit law firm dedicated to helping low-income families. My unit specializes in education law, advocating for students with disabilities, addressing school discipline, truancy, and student homelessness. And I manage our model project representing children involved in child protection cases. My work also involves legislative and policy advocacy to promote progressive children's policies in education, children's mental health, and juvenile justice, and to advance fairness for underserved communities. And this part of today's program focuses on how recent federal funding changes are affecting Connecticut's civil legal aid infrastructure and why that matters, based on a reporting by a number of our legal aid agencies. This is not simply a budget conversation, it is a structural access to justice issue, as you will hear over and over again tonight. And for those of us working in legal aid and for the hundreds of thousands of low-income people who qualify for our services across the state of Connecticut, federal funding decisions made over the past 2 years or so are now translating into staffing reductions, delayed enforcement, and reduced representation capacity, spanning across all of our substantive legal work, including in housing, domestic violence, immigration, education, veterans advocacy, and healthcare-related legal matters. And our discussion here connects those funding shifts to practical consequences in our courts and communities, and the information, as I said, based off information provided by a number of our state's legal aid programs. So at a high level, multiple simultaneous dynamics are converging. First, federal funding instability is reducing legal aid capacity across multiple legal aid organizations in Connecticut. These are nonprofits operating already with very limited funding and resources. Second, temporary pandemic relief funds, particularly COVID-era American Rescue Plan or ARPA funding, masked deeper structural vulnerabilities. ARPA was never intended as more than a stopgap, and those funds are now expiring. Third, demand for services has not decreased. We all see the headlines, and it is hard to ignore the very real economic strain out there. But for the low-income residents of our state, it has now risen to crisis level. And in many areas, including housing and benefits access, demand has increased significantly since 2019. And as we know, when rising demand meets contracting capacity, the predictable outcome is widening access to justice gaps. And I will start with the Connecticut Veterans Legal Center, which experienced substantial growth due to federal grants, including supportive services for veteran families contracts and ARPA-funded right to counsel support. ARPA funding also enabled hiring of 3 additional attorneys. The CVLC expansion had allowed more veterans facing eviction, medical issues, benefits denials to receive comprehensive representation. However, because ARPA funds were always time limited, as they sunset, there are implications not only for how many individual veterans get assistance from CVLC, but also for things like statewide homelessness prevention efforts, which depend heavily on coordinated legal intervention across a number of our legal aid organizations. The three full-service Connecticut legal aid organizations, Greater Hartford Legal Aid, New Haven Legal Assistance Association, and Connecticut Legal Services, are no longer receiving Victims of Crime Act or VOCA funding. Collectively, that represents approximately $2.4 million in annual losses, and you can see in the graph how that's distributed among our various agencies. At our three organizations, the VOCA funding was administered through the Department of Justice, passing through Connecticut's Office of Victim Services, and helped fund domestic violence representation, immigration relief for survivors, family law matters, child protection advocacy, and education-related cases. Due to new federal restrictions by the Department of Justice and contractual uncertainty, the agencies declined to accept the funding under revised conditions. And one particularly significant additional impact is on a 9-year-long standing statewide domestic violence collaboration involving legal aid and two victim advocacy organizations, the Connecticut Alliance to End Sexual Violence and the Connecticut Coalition Against Domestic Violence. That collaboration is currently operating on temporary ARPA funds that will soon expire, and legal aid, as we just discussed, no longer has VOCA funding. This work is essential for domestic violence survivors. Connecticut's legal aid organizations are committed to sustaining these services, but without that federal funding, maintaining the level of resources necessary to support victims will become significantly more challenging. Statewide Legal Services serves as our statewide civil legal aid hotline and intake system, our statewide access point for right to counsel applicants and evictions, and an important source of case referrals to GHLA, New Haven, and CLS for the past 30 years, as well as a partner in tech support for the Connecticut Network for Legal Aid. It is also the only Connecticut program directly funded by the Legal Services Corporation, or LSC. Between 83 and 93% of its operating budget comes from LSC. A recent federal appropriations reduction results in a projected $160,000 decrease and an estimated 350 to 400 fewer cases handled, including referrals for this year and next. Because SLS is the front door to legal aid, reductions there do not remain isolated. They will ripple outward to our partner programs and affect referral pipelines, intake capacity, and representation rates statewide. Future HUD grants to the Open Communities Alliance are vulnerable. OCA relies on HUD's Fair Housing Initiatives program for approximately 37% of its annual budget, and OCA's awarded grant funds had been delayed for over a year, requiring reliance on reserves and pauses in hiring. Looking forward, projected shortfalls for 2027 could reach $550,000 if federal fair housing funding is reduced or eliminated. In addition to funding uncertainty, clients suffer. HUD's fair housing enforcement staffing has reportedly been reduced by roughly 70%, limiting HUD's ability to handle housing discrimination cases. Reduced enforcement infrastructure at the federal level makes private enforcement and nonprofit advocacy even more critical and simultaneously more strained. And I'm skipping over this because I understand that the Fair Housing Center is one of the presenters in the next segment. So you will receive more information about what's going on there. And this is not an exclusive list, obviously, of the organizations managing the impact of federal funding changes. More than 168,000 Connecticut residents are projected to lose Medicaid coverage over the next decade under current federal reconciliation measures, and the state will be limited in its ability to raise money from the federal government. Nearly 400,000, that's 1 in 9 Connecticut residents, rely on SNAP benefits, with half of those recipients being families with children. Changes in eligibility and funding structures are likely to reduce benefits and increase food insecurity, including cuts to low-income children in Head Start and school lunch programs. Changes to reproductive health care funding, essentially eliminating Planned Parenthood Medicaid funds, will increase strain on healthcare providers. And new federal healthcare provisions have reduced coverage for immigrants and states that expanded Medicaid coverage, like Connecticut. So why does this matter? When economic and healthcare instability increase, legal crises tend to follow across the board. This includes evictions, custody disputes, public determinations, and much more. and these are exactly the types of crises that legal aid is set up to manage. For practicing attorneys, courts, and administrative agencies hearing these cases, these developments mean more self-represented litigants, more complex cases without early stabilization, and increased docket pressure. Legal aid reductions do not reduce legal need. They shift that need into courtrooms, hearing rooms, and into the private bar. Judges may see more continuances, more incomplete filings, and longer proceedings. Private attorneys may experience increased demand for limited scope representation or pro bono involvement. And understanding the funding landscape helps contextualize these changes. So, in closing, federal funding restrictions to legal aid and reductions are not abstract policy debates. These are operational realities that affect staffing, case acceptance, enforcement capacity, and ultimately the integrity of our civil justice system. Thank you for your attention.
Agatha, thank you for giving us that very comprehensive insight on how things are impacting folks on the ground here in Connecticut. So we've heard both from our friend Karen about the national impact and from Agatha about Connecticut. Now we'd like to shift and hear a little bit about lived experiences of the folks that we are serving. We know that cuts to legal aid funding don't just affect a person's immediate legal needs, but they also have implications on all sorts of things that people experience in life and their families. Isha and Greg, can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing on the ground in Connecticut? How are the lives of Connecticut residents being impacted by these federal funding changes? And I would encourage you to say a few words about the work that you're doing if you'd like to introduce yourselves more fully. Isha, why don't we start with you and then we'll go to Greg. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so very much. I am honored to attend this event tonight and a privilege to be a public servant to 1.2 million residents here in the state of Connecticut who are in need of food, cash, and medical assistance. Here at the Department of Social Services, and my colleague Agata said it perfectly with the numbers that she talked about with those who will be impacted by work requirements in Medicaid. That's over a third of our Husky D population. And then with our folks who are receiving food assistance, nearly 400,000 are served here in Connecticut, and all are going through work requirements right now as we speak. And so right now, the SNAP work requirements are currently in flight. So the bill went into effect on July 4th. And what we've been seeing is, many clients experiencing food insecurity. And that was actually heightened during the time of the government shutdown last fall. So the state has been doing a lot to make sure that we can make sure that many vulnerable and low-income families here in the state do not go hungry. So we have been plussing up, things around our food share, food banks locally around our communities, and figuring out ways to help continue on health benefits throughout our Access Health CT program in Covered Connecticut to make sure that people do not lose benefits. But we are lucky here in the great state of Connecticut and the commitment by Governor Lamont to make sure that our residents here in Connecticut are not going without. So thank you for this presentation to be brought up, and we're going to just go through this very quickly because I want to just give everyone a little bit of a depth and breadth of scope around Medicaid and SNAP. So we can continue to advance the slides. We'll continue here. We can go to slide 3. And so as you can see, the work requirements and the impact to our low-income families and the most vulnerable are vast. And as we continue on slide 4, we can give you a little bit of insight into when these actually take effect. So as I mentioned, we're currently going through the SNAP work requirements right now. We've already lost our SNAP education funding at the end of September, and now the agency is working towards the response for Medicaid, which is really significant and really wide sweeping with this bill. And we can advance to slide 6. What's really important to note here is that Medicaid work requirements have never existed before this bill. So our current state is it didn't exist. And then as we move on, starting in January 1st, all of our Husky D enrollees will be subject to some sort of Medicaid work requirements, with almost a third almost being without health coverage. And so we're trying to figure out how we do as much education and finding other access to resources for those who may no longer be eligible because of the new requirements that they have now to meet. So we'll continue on to slide 7. Typically in our environment, we do have what we call retroactive eligibility, because sometimes getting these verifications for some health conditions can take some time, but we do not want to leave people without health coverage. So in our current state, we typically allow up to 90 days. But going forward, effective January 1st, 2017, we will see that get reduced to 1 month for our Husky D population. And this is our adults age 18 to 64, and down to 2 months for our Husky A, B, and C populations. So if we'll advance to slide 9, we will get to see that there are still some work requirement exemptions, right? So there will be some folks, as they meet these exemptions, will still be able to have eligibility for healthcare coverage. However, this is not expansive as it was before. So we're still working through a lot of these definitions to make sure that we can really identify impacts to our impacted populations and members, so that we know how to best serve them as we continue to move throughout our response here in Connecticut. We'll advance to slide 10. We also are seeing major impacts to our non-citizens in the state. We had health coverage for many non-citizens who qualified for Medicaid and CHIP, and we were able to help that population in such great ways. And in our future state, a lot of those supports will be going away for non-citizens, and this is very troubling for those who live in our state and actually need access to health care. We will continue on to actually slide 14. We're going to talk about some of the changes to SNAP. There's a lot here on the slide, and I'm just going to hit some of the salient points. The biggest thing to know with SNAP, we've actually had work requirements, and that dates back actually to the early 70s with some other legislation. But what's different here is that we have more restrictions on the work requirements, where a lot of those exemptions that Connecticut was able to take advantage of, we will no longer be able to do that. So we're really concerned about food insecurity here in the state, and those who will no longer be eligible. Like I said, SNAP work requirements are currently underway, and we're starting to see those low-income families fall off of the program. And we're trying to work very hard and diligently to identify those and give them additional supports. So we expect somewhere anywhere between the ballpark of 30 to 40,000 SNAP recipients to drop from coverage between December and the end of March of this year. And with that, that will conclude my update for today. Happy to hear from my other colleague.
All right, good evening. I'm here from the Connecticut Fair Housing Center, and to talk briefly about how our federal funding cuts are impacting us and the community we serve. Fair Housing Center's mission is to ensure access to equal housing opportunity in Connecticut, free from discrimination, and we help people who experience sort of traditional discrimination, but also people who live under an experience of exploitation and oppression that is often linked to protected class status, particularly race, disability, and family status. We engage in legal enforcement, community education, and systemic advocacy. Our direct support from HUD, seeing this chart from 2016 to the present, has averaged around $500,000 to $600,000 a year, and our anticipated 2026 funding is in fact zero. So that is a significant blow to our services. It's about 25 to 30% of our budget. With that, we assisted 2,000 people last year who contacted us for assistance, and also reached over 6,600 people with education about their rights and responsibilities under the fair housing laws. So one example of the funding that we received from HUD traditionally, you can see in this grant approval letter, award letter received in April 2024. We received a grant for education and outreach for advancing racial equity. That was the name of the program that we applied under. In early 2025, we received a notice of termination because this award no longer effectuates the program goals or agency priorities of HUD. This is not okay. When we talk about impacts upon our clients, we can talk about the fact that we are down a couple of positions that we've left empty through attrition in order to save money. We can talk about the fact that we're spending down our reserve. We can talk about the fact that we're asking everyone we can think of, including former clients who are stepping up to help fund our ongoing programs. But it's a real coarsening of society. It's a coarsening of our legal system. It's a coarsening of the interactions that people face on a day-to-day basis. When it becomes not a priority of an agency tasked with enforcing the nation's commitment to fair housing to advance racial equity, we have deep, deep problems that go beyond funding for my agency and create larger problems. So housing discrimination still persists in the United States. The United States and Connecticut remain highly segregated. 67% of the population of Connecticut of color lives in 8% of Connecticut's towns. People with disabilities and housing vouchers are disproportionately impacted as well. You can see from this map the concentration of people based on race, largely in urban centers and largely disproportionately impacted by poor conditions and exploitive rental relationships that persist to today. So what it means on a day-to-day basis. Before we got on here, I picked up the West Hartford News that just happened to be in my driveway, and there's a headline, LGBTQ plus advocates brace for federal shifts, push for state protections. Everything is being pushed down on the state and pushed down on agencies like ours and like others on this call. We have to look out for each other. We have to recognize that not only is this a starving of resources for people who need them, it is really having the effect, and intentionally so, of discouraging people from speaking up about their rights, from challenging mistreatment, from looking out for their neighbors. So many of those things discussed about the executive orders by Karen earlier are really frightening for people. It's frightening for agencies. It's frightening for individuals. We see the dehumanization of immigrants, the dehumanization of people who may be transgendered. And that has a chilling effect on people being willing to stand up for their own rights and band together to stand up for the rights of others. So for those of us who have the privilege of being members of the bar, who may have the privilege of other status and wealth, what this means is that we have to say this isn't okay, and we need to provide services, we need to speak up, and we need to advocate for everyone who's been targeted by these cuts and by these really dehumanizing statements, who are the most vulnerable around us. Someone mentioned earlier that Connecticut is standing up, both Attorney General Tong and the governor and the legislature, and that is true, but they can't do it alone. It really falls upon all of us in the bar and all of us throughout the state to really make our voices heard and to contribute an effort to make sure that no one is excluded from the civil justice system because they're too afraid to access it or because the resources simply don't exist to allow them to access it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg and Nisha, for helping us get a better sense of the direct impact on the communities and people we care about. So we've heard about the challenges that our communities have, and I'm sure all the attendants tonight are quite familiar with them. But we also know that during times of crisis, people come together, they collaborate, there's a lot of innovation, and there's a lot of exciting things that are happening in communities that we also want to share as we are thinking creatively about the kind of solutions that work. In the nonprofit space, hope is our currency. And so we need to remember that we have been through many tough times. At the moment, it seems like this is an exceptional and a tough time, a 5-alarm fire, as they say. But we will work together and make a difference for the people we care about and whom we serve. So this is the moment that we'd like to talk about some innovations and some exciting things that are happening. I am going to call on everyone to weigh in. And I've also been asked to share about some things that are happening in the philanthropic space. So I'll take a few minutes to share that with you. I can say that our Community Foundation of Eastern Connecticut has been working in partnership with other funders. For example, there is now a funders collaborative working on immigration that we've put together monies that we have made available to the nonprofits doing the work on the ground to make a difference. There is lobbying and advocacy on many fronts. We have a campaign going on to end child poverty in Connecticut. Connecticut Legal Services is one of our 100 plus members, partners in this campaign that is involving a lot of advocacy and lobbying. And this year we are focused on getting the legislature to pass legislation that will create a Connecticut SNAP program to address what was just talked about, the folks who have now been made ineligible for receiving SNAP. So we're hoping that through a program that is a Connecticut program, they can be coverage for those people. We're also advocating for school meals for all school children and a child tax credit to help working families. We're connecting with the nonprofits throughout our region to get a better sense of what their immediate needs are and how we can help, both through systems change work, through convenings and grant making. We are bringing together the executive directors of various nonprofits and helping them with the needs that they identify. And we are supporting, we're working with our municipalities, and we're supporting pro bono partnership to provide free legal aid for the nonprofits in our region that need it. We have to recognize that SNAP provides $9 billion monthly nationwide, and philanthropy can't fill that space. But we can hold the government accountable for what they need to do. In the larger space of philanthropy, the Connecticut Council on Philanthropy has been bringing together funders to do work on a number of things, such as supporting litigation by groups that need the money, supporting coordination and strategy development by different nonprofits in our sector. I mentioned the immigrant resources. There's also work being done around housing, and a number of organizations have been increasing their funding to make it possible to support a larger number of nonprofits than ever before. Now I'd like to turn to Daniela. In recent years, we have seen how the reduction in federal funding has impacted victims of domestic violence. We'd like to hear from you a little bit about the new program and clinic that has been set up to help victims.
Thank you, Miriam. Thank you, everybody, for being here to listen to all of us this evening. And I don't have a PowerPoint for you, but I do have a short story to tell you. I've been a victims advocate for nearly 12 years. I work at the New Britain Courthouse, and I work for a nonprofit called the Prudence Crandall Center, which is a domestic violence agency. It's one of the member programs of the Connecticut Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And I've been doing this work for many years for very specific reasons. If anyone has ever seen how domestic violence works, we all know that it's very complicated. When I started out, I was a criminal court victim advocate, and I want to tell you a short story. One day, I was working, and a victim came in. She had been strangled by her abuser, but I knew this victim from work. She worked in the courthouse. She was a clerk. She had been strangled to the point where she was covered in petechiae. Her eyes were bloodshot, her throat swollen. I had to take photographs of her injuries. And I said to her, "Why didn't you file a restraining order before it? Why didn't you call the police before this? Why did you wait until it got to this point?" And she looked at me and she said, "You know how the court goes. I would never make it in family court." In 2016, we were able to get VOCA funding to fund civil court victim advocates that would help victims of domestic violence, not just in criminal court when someone was arrested, but before it got to that point, helping victims of domestic violence get resources and information and support as they file for divorce, child custody, and restraining orders. Unfortunately, as we've heard tonight, there has been so much funding that has been cut. There have been so many resources that victims no longer have, and that has left a vacuum for our clients. So today I want to tell you about the clinic that we started just last year in February of 2025. I was approached by CCADV to create a law clinic for victims of domestic violence in the New Britain area, closely modeled after their program, the Pro Bono Restraining Order Project. This was done in partnership with the University of Connecticut Law School. Their professor, Rachel Reeves, and I met, and we developed a program with a training of 2 hours that we recorded for anyone that wants to join us. This training included statutes about the restraining order process and law. It included information about the Family Relations Office and their role in the court system. It includes information about how to prepare a client for testimony and vicarious trauma, all sorts of things that can help an attorney and volunteer to better understand how to work with victims in this type of work. To echo what Greg said so perfectly, what's going on now? This is not okay. We all have the ability to stand up and advocate and provide something. So this clinic opened in February of 2025. Every other Wednesday, a law student from UConn and their professor come to the New Britain Courthouse, and they dedicate a few hours to working with a victim of domestic violence. They help them with their paperwork, and now we even have other attorneys coming to volunteer their time. I want to thank Sandy Giralmo and Pam Magnano from the Flattery Law Group who come and volunteer their time and expertise. Not only are these clients getting legal information and support, they're also getting advocacy and resources. It becomes a one-stop shop for them where they can get help and to be heard. While we can't do everything for our clients, while we can't provide the funding and support they need in so many ways, all of us on this Zoom tonight can provide a grassroots effort to help people that are going through a tough time. I'm very happy to say that our clinic, since February of last year, although we can't meet every single week and we are bound by student schedules, we've served 37 clients of domestic violence, ages 18 to 60, including their children. We've had 13 law students come through, and we serve the catchment areas of the New Britain, Bristol, Plainville areas. Out of those 37 clients, 21 of those clients got their restraining orders granted on an ex parte basis. 7 were not granted, and 8 did not proceed. At hearing, 21 of those were also granted at hearing. Only 2 were not granted at hearing. 11 people did not proceed, and 3 people were unable to serve their abuser. Out of those people who did not proceed, they were all given other options other than a restraining order. They were all given other legal options, other safety planning options. Every single one of those 37 people was given information not just on legal options, but they were connected with my agency's counseling services, housing services, and they were given opportunities to get help in all sorts of different ways, from tax information to food information. This clinic is helping people not just to get information on a restraining order, but to get help in every way possible. While funding cuts are so concerning, and this is a terrifying time for all of us in this type of work, I want to encourage you all to remember that we all can do something at the grassroots level. If anyone has further questions for me or is interested in helping with our clinic, I'm sure that Jen has information and she can provide it so that you can reach out. I thank you all for your time and your attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniela, for sharing that story. 37 people helped. I think, for all of us, each individual and their families that we help, that's remarkable. You're all heroes, and this is such important work. I'd like to open the floor to everyone so that you can share some new developments, some exciting initiatives, some things that are happening that you're aware of in your space to share with others. I suggest we go in the order that folks spoke. So Karen, why don't we start with you?
Thanks, Miriam. So our original challenge was to come up with one innovation that really excites us. And so I guess this is mine. I'm cheating a little. But I'm just really wondering if this is the moment where we totally reimagine what's politically and practically possible, not just to preserve, but to improve justice. Because we can't just return to the status quo where 92% of civil legal problems faced by low-income people don't get resolved. So I would say that the one big thing is AI and technology tools. It's controversial, I know, but potentially has the greatest potential for transformative change and doing more with less, which just isn't optional. So, and I'm certain that there are adoptions happening all around Connecticut. So I'm talking just at the highest level and about the potential for statewide collaboration on some of this. So, for example, there are tools being used and maybe some of this is already happening in Connecticut, but I'm aware from the National Center for State Courts that tools are being used to just dismiss non-compliant cases on high volume dockets like consumer debt. There is constantly improving language software. There are all kinds of self-help tools. AI is helping with intake and triage. It's generating solid first draft of documents in minutes. It can automate a lot of what we do manually around finance and development and grant management, not sexy stuff, but it really overloads our administrative teams and can save tons of time. So I think that was the sound of my getting uninvited to future dinner parties. But I really believe it's urgent and that we need to dedicate time to figuring out what works best, is most ethical, and adopt and train our staff. And I know I have a link. The Chronicle of Philanthropy just did a really terrific webinar. I'm going to put the link in the chat. on how to use AI for grant management that I thought was excellent as an example of really what we can do.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Karen. And a reminder to everyone, if there are questions, please put them in the chat. Now's a
Oh,
good time to
oops.
do that so I can ask the presenters. Agatha.
So, Karen, it looks like you and I will be uninvited to dinner parties together because I would like to report that at CLS we just established an AI committee. It's joint staff, management, and leadership, and we're exploring uses of AI for legal aid. So, Connecticut Legal Services has been participating with a number of other nonprofits in a nonprofit sprint where we are intentionally testing AI, collaborating using peer learning groups to see what might work and what doesn't. This is all still at the very beginning stages. And given, as you said, that this is still very nascent technology, there's a lot to learn about, including obviously concerns about security and confidentiality. And protecting our clients is, of our utmost concern. But we are really excited to explore, whether and how we can stretch our resources and possibly facilitate increasing capacity, streamlining certain processes, and helping more clients in the future. And then a quick second um, project we're working on is a medical legal partnership over at St. Vincent's Hospital out of our Bridgeport office. This is a project with our elder unit that provides a range of services, including POA, long-term care issues, social determinants of health. And it's holistic because we can leverage CLS's broad knowledge and ability to provide services in all of our other substantive legal areas we cover. And that's a way that we can also kind of pull together resources across a lot of different areas.
Terrific. Thank you so much for sharing that. Isha, do you want to share some innovative initiatives with us?
Yes, I see a theme here. Many of us are getting uninvited to dinner parties. So, as part of our agency's response to HR1, we are also looking at artificial intelligence and in the ways that it can help our clients and our workforce. We stand to have a large administrative burden with these new Medicaid work requirements that never existed before. And we do not want that to get in the way of people getting access to the benefits and critical services that they need. So specifically, we have frequent redeterminations that are going to happen every 6 months now and versus annually. So we want to make sure that AI can actually help our clients and our members help to enroll and get their information in. And those clients and members who have exemptions for continuing on benefits and services, we want to make sure that we don't drag them through a lengthy process that's unnecessary. We're also looking at how we help with verifications with paperwork, especially on income. We want to do that in more of an automated fashion versus, having people show up in person with pay stubs, and we're trying to duplicate entry into systems and things of that nature. And then we're also looking at ways to target those at the community level and local levels to help people meet those 80 hours per month, whether if it's working, education, or training, and let them know where they stand with meeting those requirements every month so that they do not lapse their benefits and coverage. So AI can stand to help a lot with these new work requirements, and we're looking at ways to do that, the social services agency. So thank you.
Terrific. Greg.
I guess I am the AI skeptic on the panel. That being said, the Fair Housing Center created an eviction self-help tool in 2021, 2022. We've created a reasonable accommodation letter generator. Even before that, both have been successful and useful. But I sort of feel about AI in terms of civil access as kind of giving folks a tourniquet when they need at least a paramedic and preferably a doctor. So, it's better than nothing. We have to look at it. But the real ask, I think, is for the rest of society to step up and fill the gaps that are being created by the retreat at the federal level. And that's the only way that we're going to move justice forward.
Terrific. Thank you all. So at this point, I don't see any questions in the chat. So I'd like to invite you, and we'll go in reverse order, meaning we'll start with you, Greg, of any thoughts that you'd like to leave our audience with, or any reactions or any reactions to your fellow speakers.
I think, Karen did a really great job of laying out the landscape that we're looking at and the obvious and less obvious threats that exist to organizations attempting to help marginalized and disfavored populations. I think that there unfortunately may be a need for the type of legal assistance that is not as directed at a direct service, but at providers who may find themselves in the crosshairs of some aggressive federal action. I think, you know, some of the things I heard, suggestions about AI, about screening out and automatically dismissing cases, I think is a great idea. I think using AI to help people meet reporting requirements is a great idea. I think using AI in the private sector and in the private bar to perhaps free up more time to do pro bono work would probably be a great idea. But again, I think that we really need to keep our eyes on the ultimate prize, which is, just access for everybody and fair representation for everybody in the civil legal system, so it's not such an unbalanced playing field for so many people in our community.
Terrific. Thank you. Isha?
Yes, I would like to just, offer up to this esteemed body based on the wonderful work that you do, to partner with our agency more deeply around these challenges. As Karen pointed out earlier, we do expect to see a rise, what we call internally here, some of our fair hearings, but also clients needing legal support because they may be, facing barriers where those new verifications that they have to get in and they may be burdensome, and just figuring out how we partner together to make sure that we can reduce those level of incidents that may happen, whether through education or other types of partnerships, but look forward to doing that with this group.
Daniela, I didn't want to skip you.
Thank you. Like I said earlier, I really agreed with what Greg said. I do feel like this is a really scary time for all of us in this world. But the fact that there are this many people interested in helping each other gives me a lot of hope.
Yes, I agree with you totally. Agatha?
So, Connecticut's long relied on a collaboration between federal funding and state support and nonprofit legal aid to maintain access to justice. That being said, historically, we've also encountered, with changes of administrations, large shifts in our funding bases. And we've been innovative, we've been creative, we've worked together to create solutions. And I don't see this any differently. I think everybody here is very, very passionate about the work. And I also am hopeful that we'll be able to, salvage what we have, create some new streams of funding, continue to be creative in our different projects, and share all of that information with each other as we, forge ahead over the next few years.
Thank you. And Karen?
I believe Connecticut has this amazing community with the expertise, the relationships, the collaborative spirit, which is, I think, essential, and the moral authority to just turbocharge these solutions that are going to have to deliver more and cost less. So, from my kind of national perch, I feel really good about Connecticut's prospects for tackling what may seem daunting, but to be able to do it. I would say I do have that slide of resources, and I'm not sure who has it and can share it so that I can run through them. Jen or Tom,
While you're waiting
any
for that,
chance?
and I'm sure they'll send you a text about that, I'm gonna share some questions from the floor. From Jack, he's asking if there's anything coming up on the Supreme Court calendar that may be impactful on the defunding situation.
So I confess I am no longer tracking every single case because there are so many. The really great news is that an organization called Democracy Forward, they've been one of the national organizations that have been challenging so many of the grant-related problems that by the end of February, they're going to have a database, a searchable database of all of the grant-related cases. And so we'll all be able to have an easier job of tracking what's going on and which cases are, jumping out ahead and potentially landing in the Supreme Court.
Okay, that's good to know.
Right.
Yes,
Okay.
go ahead.
So, yeah. So here's the slide. Is it okay if I?
Sure.
Yeah. So it's a little bit of a mishmash of resources, but I especially wanted to point out that Lawyers for Good Government, another national organization that's really been doing phenomenally great work, they have a fund protection clinic. So nonprofits that need some counsel, you can fill out the intake form and request help. They've been doing a really, really good job. And I included the guidance memo. It says USDA, DEI, and gender-related general grant terms and conditions. Even if you are not a USDA grantee, it's an excellent memo. I think it was current as of February 11th, so it doesn't have the GSA new SAM certification in it, but it has an excellent analysis of the DEI language and includes recommendations of things that you can be doing if you are taking federal funds that have DEI certifications. I think it's great. The explanation about that new certification that's going to be across the entire federal government in uniform is in the Venable Law Firm brief. That's the next one. Center for Budget and Policy Priorities is also doing excellent work, just summarizing what's happening with federal funding. Anybody in Connecticut who received one of the most recent two Justice Department OVC grants, DOJ has not published a list of who got them, but I think there's either 45 or 48 grant awards that have been made, and they have new bad language in the agreement to accept the funds. So Democracy Forward has, again, a really excellent memo explaining that language and giving some guidance. And then Governing for Impact has been also publishing good stuff on how to challenge funding related terms and conditions. So anyway, that's the collection of resources on that slide.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Karen. So, question from Erica to all of us, all of you, which addresses intersectionality, so important as we talk about collaborative work. She wants to know if there are efforts to solve, sort of address all the issues together as opposed to separately And she gives the example of AI data centers being built around the country, specifically in low-income minority communities, worsening environmental racism. And I imagine, kind of connecting that to all sorts of other issues that are impacting equity in our communities. Does anyone want to address that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, the gold standard and the dream to be able to address things holistically, and intersectionality in mind. Um, and often organizations are siloed, and even programs within organizations are siloed from each other. One of the things that I think makes it challenging is that most civil legal organizations are drinking from a fire hose all the time of individual complaints and individual issues. And so finding the time to rally to address something systemically or on a larger scale is very resource challenging. Oftentimes, sort of large scale cases are those that get the assistance from the private bar, from a lawyer's coordinating committee. But certainly, within our work at the Fair Housing Center, our experience with people experiencing discrimination based on their source of income or based on their race or family status or disability led us to understanding the importance of addressing housing conditions and housing exploitation that isn't necessarily explicitly about race, but impacts people and tends to correlate with protected class status. So yeah, all these things do fit together at some level. And unfortunately, everything that's happening at the federal level makes it harder and harder to address these in a broad-based way. For example, environmental racism is no longer recognized by the federal government, by HUD. We're swimming against some pretty strong currents coming out of Washington.
Any others who want to respond? Okay, and our last question is addressing whether it's possible to estimate how many federal fund dollars Connecticut legal programs of all sorts will lose in 2026. I imagine that that number can be obtained, but it's a collaborative effort between all the various entities. And then the questionnaire is suggesting that the Connecticut Bar Foundation could help distribute contributions that others can make. So, does anyone have access to those numbers, or is that something that can be? I imagine there's all sorts of attempts being made to figure out how to address this. So I don't know, Agatha, if you want to take a stab at that, or if you have any
I
ideas.
don't have those figures handy. What I can say is that when you're looking at funding, it's kind of the moving target. Funding deadlines vary. Some are calendar year, some are like a, July through June schedule. And also, as per the earlier presentation, there are agencies like OCA which have funds but have not received those funds yet. So those budgets are constantly shifting. And the other thing that we've been experiencing, obviously, over the last year is this barrage of executive orders that's also changing the way that we have to handle our funding. So I think it's theoretically an easy question to answer, but it would definitely just be a point in time
That's
if you're
correct.
looking at a specific number.
That's correct. That's correct.
I
Well,
I'd add, Carl, I like the way you think, and nominate you for benevolent dictator. But when we talk about these numbers are extraordinarily meaningful for organizations like ours, and extraordinarily meaningful for the people that we serve. But they're not huge numbers when you compare them to other things that happen in the world and other things that happen in government. So, we're talking in the millions of dollars, not the multiple tens of millions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars. I do think that there is a place for other funders and for other folks to step up and to close these gaps, which, hopefully, this is an aberration and we'll get back on track sometime in the future. But there are certainly gaps to fill. Now, for Department of Social Services, it's a much different story. As mentioned, filling in the gaps from something like food assistance is in an unbelievable lift.
Thank you, Greg. Again, we are so lucky to be in Connecticut and to be served by organizations such as all of yours. And thank you for your deep commitment to all of our presenters. Thank you for making time to be here tonight and to talk to our audience. I'd also like to thank our sponsors, the Planning Committee, all of you attending this conversation, this webinar. Information about upcoming events in this series can be found on the Connecticut Bar Association and Connecticut Bar Foundation websites. And with that, I wish you all a good evening. Please be safe and warm.